Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead podcast. I'm your host, Lisa. And on today's episode, we're actually taking a very, very deep dive into how we can inflation-proof our homesteads. This is a two-part series. Today, we are discussing the first part, which has more to deal with those of you who are just starting on your homesteading journey, how you can create and inflation proof, or at least aid in inflation proofing your future homestead. And then the second half of this podcast, which will be aired next week, will be for those of us that have more established homesteads with animals and we're already producing some of our own food, how we can inflation proof our homesteads as well. I'm excited for this episode, so let's get to it. Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead. Come along with us on our journey from a small suburban homestead lifestyle to our new lifestyle, homesteading in the rural countryside of southern Arizona. We'll share with you our tips, tricks, successes, and failures from both our past suburban lifestyle to our new rural lifestyle, all on the 2 Acre Homestead. So for those of you who are just starting out on your homestead journey, you might be thinking to yourself, am I making the right choice? Because we are living in some momentous times, aren't we? We are seeing some really interesting things play out in the world scene, and there are just, it seems like everything is coming at you from every which direction, and it is. This series is not meant to be any sort of fear-mongering, but what we are discussing today is just the reality of what we see in the world today. And that is you have war, you have a supply chain issue, which is creating shortages of food, and you also have inflation, which is making the cost of what food is available very expensive. The likelihood of any of this changing anytime soon is very small. And a lot of that has to do with the price of fertilizer. Believe it or not, we have in the world, we have a shortage of fertilizer. And the way things are set up in the world today, most things use grain crops, which are wheat, rice, and corn. So most of us consume those grains in one way, shape, or the other. And also soy is not to be forgotten. All of said crops rely heavily on fertilizer. So we can see the price of things start to increase as a lot of farmers are saying they just simply cannot afford to plant things that require a lot of fertilizer. For example, in this area that we live in here in the desert Southwest of the United States, we are seeing a lot of farms there who produce hay. They aren't able to plant a whole lot of hay this year because of the shortage of fertilizer. And what fertilizer is available is extremely expensive, and those prices get passed down to you as the consumer. So with all of this coming in at you from a financial perspective, the world is also just getting out of the pandemic. There's just a lot on everybody's plate. But I have to say, this is not the first time that any of us have seen this. We've seen this movie before, or if we weren't alive at that time, we have read it. And I'm talking about not the Great Depression, although that is probably a good comparison as well. But what I'm talking about is the financial crisis that we all experienced in 2007 and 2008. And we saw the economy just tank. Prices did increase on certain things, but we did not have some of the things that we have that we're dealing with today, such as supply chain issues and a war in Ukraine. So there are some new players on the stage, but this is not a new movie. We've seen this before. It's more like we're seeing the sequel. Um, but it is still worrisome. And for those of you who were around in 2007 and 2008, your lives are probably drastically different than they were back then. I know it is the case for us. We have a family. We live out in the countryside, so things look completely different. So today we are addressing this episode for those of you who are starting out on your homesteading journey, and this is all happening in the middle of you starting your homesteading journey. And you might be scratching your head thinking, how do I deal with this? Is this worth it? And you might be thinking, there's so many things coming at me from every angle, from every which way. Maybe I should just go back to the way life was and just buy everything from the store and, just kind of put my head down in the sand and hope that all of this blows over. That is one way to handle it. That is one thing that you can do. Or there are some things that you can do to get a handle on your homestead and your homesteading journey and inflation proof that particular journey. And those are the tips that I want to give to you today. I have 9 tips in total, and we're going to go through them one by one. So the first one is create and stick to a budget. I cannot tell you how important it is, no matter where you are in your homesteading journey. You need to have a budget and you need to stick to said budget. I know for my husband and I, we are well deep into our homestead journey. And as a matter of fact, it's no longer a journey for us. We have arrived. And this is the life that we live. And even for us, we have a budget. We stick to that budget. We have a budget set aside for the groceries. Believe it or not, we cannot produce everything on our homestead, and neither do I have the time to create everything. Even though I cook from scratch 3 times a day, make most of our food from scratch, there are still some things that I choose to buy at the grocery store. We created our budget years ago, and I have refused, as time has gone on, even with inflation, I've refused to change my budget. I refuse to increase it because we've created a budget, and I am determined to stick to that budget. So stick to your budget, stick to your guns, stick to what you have said. And if you can't seem to make that budget, well, then there might be some things that you need to alter in your life to make that budget work. The other thing is this is the second point. You want to lower your monthly bills. This might be a little bit more challenging at first. Lowering your monthly bills may mean, for some of you, that maybe you need to run your house a little cooler in the winter so that you can save on your heating bill for the winter. For those of us that are in a hotter climate, maybe we have to have our house a little bit warmer in the summer. Maybe not as comfortable as we're used to. Maybe dial that air conditioning back just a little bit so that way the house can be warmer, so that way we can lower our air conditioning bill. Turn off all your lights. If you can, invest in LED lights. That way, that completely lowers your bill. Another tip in lowering your bills, and especially electricity, is make sure things are unplugged. Don't just turn them off at the source, but unplug them. And something else that you might want to think about is, especially with gas prices, as of the recording of this podcast, gas prices are through the roof right now. Stop going so many places. Do you have a bike? Maybe you can ride your bike. Maybe you can walk. Stop driving so much. If and wherever possible, do not drive as much. When you do drive, see if you can carpool with somebody. See if, hey, so-and-so is going to the same place I am. Why don't we all hop in the car together and go? Those are ways that you can start lowering your bill. Another thing that you can do, my husband and I did this a while ago, and that is our local electricity and gas company, they have a thing where, and this is when we were in the city, this isn't here where we are now, but when we were in the city, they had what's called an equalizer program. So they take your average bill. You have to live in your home for at least a year. And then they can take your bill and average your bill out for a year, and that's what you pay. We loved that program because we knew exactly what we were paying every single month. We could sit down and say, electricity, our gas, this is what we're paying. This is how much it is. No question in our mind because we were on that equalizer plan. That's a way that you can save money and then also work to keep lowering your bills, your monthly bills. Third point, try to create a well-stocked pantry. So once you start lowering your bills, I forgot to state in that lowering of your bills, and that is credit cards. Pay your credit cards off. Try to see if you can pay off your car loans. If you've got car loans or anything like that, pay that stuff off. But once you start paying down your bills, your monthly bills, you're going to have, some surplus funds. Instead of taking those surplus funds and throwing them right away into the bank, what you want to do is start creating a well-stocked pantry. As a matter of fact, do that. I would recommend that you do that sooner rather than later. And what I would recommend for you to start putting in your pantry, not beans and rice. Although if you eat beans and rice, by all means, buy beans and rice. But what I would recommend, buy canned meat and canned vegetables. The other thing I would say, buy pastas.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to build a homestead from the ground up? Or maybe you're looking to build an off-grid dream home, a vacation home, or maybe just a piece of land to call your own. Visit yourcheapland.com to buy rural land in the wide open spaces of southwestern United States. When you visit yourcheapland.com, they're here to help you, and with their help, you can do this. You can take your dream of owning land and make it a reality. Most down payments are only $294, including the document fee. Remember, everyone qualifies for financing at yourcheapland.com. Head on over to yourcheapland.com and start making those dreams come true. And now, back to our podcast.
If you have canned meat, canned vegetables, and pasta, and they're all in a tin can, you have a meal that does not need to be refrigerated right away. You can open those tin cans, create a meal, boil the noodles. You have something to put in your family's belly right away. It doesn't have to be stored in any special way. Tin cans can endure heat, they can endure cold, and they last a very, very long time on your shelf. That is what I would invest in, having a very well-stocked pantry. The other pantry that I think gets neglected in conversation when we're talking about inflation proofing is your I call it the hallway pantry, but I guess it's your linen pantry where you would keep your toilet paper, paper goods, feminine products, and medicines. Those things are extremely important for you to have at any given time, especially if you're a parent and you have children, whether they're little girls or little boys, it doesn't matter. Somebody gets sick at night because children always get sick at night, or at least my kids do. I don't know about anybody else, but it always seems like it's at the worst time, and it's always on a Friday night when the doctor's office is closed and you can't take them anywhere. Make sure you have medication in your pantry, in your stores, so that way you can take care of your family until you have the chance to go to get medical help. Always make sure you have plenty of those things stocked up. Make sure you have first aid kits in each vehicle you own. I can't tell you how many times I myself have injured myself while I'm out doing something and I cut myself or whatever. I need a Band-Aid. Well, I know I have one in my car at least. If I don't have one on my purse, I know I definitely have one in my vehicle. Keep those kinds of things around at all times. The fourth tip, start investing in food preserving tools. So this really is going to really depend on your budget, because you can go from a basic food dehydrator, a Nesco round food dehydrator, which I am, by the way, a proud owner of. And those things can cost anywhere between, last time I saw, I have not seen the current price, but the last time I saw, they go anywhere between $40 to $60. Up to, you can get a freeze dryer that will cost you $2,500. So it really just depends on what your budget is and what you're comfortable spending said money on. My personal tip is this: get yourself a food dehydrator that has a digital setting, or if not a digital setting, a dial setting. It's very important when you're dehydrating food that you dehydrate it at the right temperature. So make sure whatever food dehydrator you get, it is at the right temperature. Next thing I would recommend anybody to do is get a basic Presto canner. You can go small, you can go large, but you can go as high as like a 23 quart. I think that's what I have. And then you can go smaller. I also have that one too. But if your budget allows for you to spend over $250 on a canner, then I would say go with an all-American canner, but only go with an all-American canner if you've got gas or electric. And when I say electric, I mean a non-flat top, glass top electric stove. Because if you've got a glass top electric stove, you really need to read the manufacturer's suggestion on that, because the all-American canners and even a Presto canner, they're very heavy. And when those things are full, they're extremely heavy. The glass is heated up to a very high heat, and it can do some serious damage. So read your manufacturer's read their advice on that, look at your manual, see if that's okay to do that. The other item that I would highly recommend for you to get, and that is a secondary freezer. Always have a secondary freezer, because as you get into preserving your food, freezing your food is probably the most simplest way for you to preserve your food is to freeze it. The second most simplest way is by fermenting, but 9 times out of 10 with ferments, you need a nice, cool, dark place to store those ferments, and that usually requires people to have that in a refrigerator. So if you've got a root cellar in your house, then you're good. Then I would say don't worry about the freezer as much. Worry about, try to learn how to ferment most of your food, because you've got a cool, dark place to store your ferments. But definitely a secondary freezer, especially when you're starting to get into animals. The fifth point is invest in growing in a garden. Growing your own food is it is I'm speechless at this, because it is so important, especially for those of us who are in the homesteading space or who are wanting to become homesteaders. Learning how to grow your own and produce your own food is probably the most important thing that you can do for you and your family. Learn how to garden, learn how to plant, what to plant, when to plant, and learn how to grow from seed. Please do yourself a favor and learn how to grow from seed. It's so easy to go to your local big box store or your local nursery and take, whatever starts that there are. But if you can learn how to grow your own food from seed, you are coming out ahead financially 10 times over, because the cost of the seed packet is usually around $2 to $3. And, depending on what variety you're buying, you can get anywhere between, 40 to 100 seeds. So, if you do the math on that, that's pennies, if not less, than on the dollar. You're coming out ahead with you and your family. Grow a garden. The sixth point is, and this is part of, again, inflation proofing your homestead, and that is you don't need meat in every meal. Now, I am not advocating become a vegetarian. I am not advocating veganism. If those are the things that you choose to do, then that's perfectly fine. I've got some really good friends of mine that are strictly vegetarian, and they don't consume meat at all. And that's totally fine, to each his own. But I think as a society, we seem to always think that you need to have meat, vegetable, starch for every meal. And the truth of the matter is, you really don't need as much meat as you think you do. We really consume a lot of meat in our culture, and it's really not necessary to consume as much meat. Historically, it seems like Asian cultures seem to consume a lot of meat in the mornings. And it makes sense because all that protein, if you take in a lot of protein in the morning, it staves off hunger throughout the day. Um, so try your best if you can stomach it, try to eat most of your meat earlier in the day, and that will sustain you throughout the day. Um, so if you choose to eat meat in the morning hours, try not to eat it in the evening. Or if you eat meat in the evening, try not to do it in the morning. But you really don't need to eat a whole lot of meat. And I was doing some research on it, and I found that the ancient Israelites, the ancient Jews, the Israelites, they did not eat a lot of meat either. They used meat more of a seasoning. They ate it, but it wasn't consumed every day. Maybe once a week they would consume meat. So, really, as humans, we don't need as much meat as we consume, so we can dial that back. And from a financial perspective, meat is expensive. And if you can dial back your consumption of meat, you are going to be saving at the grocery store or wherever you get your meat from. Point number 7, cook from scratch. This is another one of those, when I read it, it leaves me speechless. That people, as a society, we just don't seem to know how to cook from scratch anymore. I did a post recently on our Instagram account at the 2 Acre Homestead, and I showed homemade tortillas. It amazes me how many people do not know how to make simple, basic foods that we probably consume daily that you can make from scratch. They're not that much work. Um, it's not as hard as you may think it is. And when you can make it from scratch, you know what's in it. And it's cheaper. You know what's in it. It's good for your family. It fills their little bellies. And it's foods like not just bread, but things like tortillas. How do you make soup from scratch? How do you make bone broth? How do you make chicken broth from scratch? And it all comes back to the kitchen, how you operate in your kitchen. For example, one thing I appreciate about the French style of cooking is that they do, when they make their meals, they've made everything from the broth to, I mean, just about everything that goes into their food, it's handmade. So, for example, they'll take an entire chicken, they will cut it up, and the parts that we normally don't eat, which is like the back, the neck, um, and some other bones, they will take that, they'll boil it down, strain it, and then they've got the broth. And then they go on with whatever they are going to do with that chicken. Well, we can do the same thing. When you're in your kitchen, do the same thing. Instead of buying chicken quarters, leg quarters, Buy an entire chicken. Learn how to cook it, an entire chicken, and learn how to cook that well. Learn how to use just basic seasonings, basic ingredients. And then as the week goes on, you can take said meat, you can chop it up, you can make tacos, you can make chicken pot pie with it, chicken salad, all kinds of things. Asian dishes, you name it, you can make it as long as you have a whole chicken. But it's that essence of learning how to cook from scratch, learning how to cook with a few ingredients and making a filling meal. It doesn't have to be fancy. And that's what's beautiful about from scratch cooking. It's not fancy. It's home. It's rustic. It's made with love behind it. And I know that sounds cliche-ish, it's made with love, but it really is because it's a labor of love. So learn how to cook from scratch, because when you're cooking from scratch with those basic ingredients, 9 times out of 10, those basic ingredients that you're cooking with are so much more inexpensive than you going and buying chicken broth. If you do the math, how much a whole chicken cost as opposed to you buying, now you're buying a chicken and chicken broth on top of it, you're adding more money when all you've got to do is just boil up the parts that you don't like and boom, you've got chicken broth. So it is a lot cheaper for you to cook from scratch than it is to buy all of your ingredients. Point number 8, try to grow your own animals. I struggled with having this one on the list because if you're new to homesteading, having animals on your homestead may create an additional expense. And you have to weigh this one out. Because it might be beneficial for you to have them and it may not be. But I'm going to make the argument that having animals on your homestead is actually beneficial. Chickens are the gateway animal to homesteading. And anybody who's looking into becoming a homesteader, usually will start with chickens. Why do they start with chickens? Because chickens provide you with their meat if you choose to slaughter them. They also provide you with eggs if you choose to let them live. So, and there's also other benefits that chickens provide on your homestead. They consume your chicken scraps, or I'm sorry, not your chicken scraps, your kitchen scraps. They also add fertilizer to your gardens. So they really complete that. They create a closed loop system on your homestead. And that's usually, that is the beginner homesteader. That's their first experience. That's your first experience dealing with a closed loop system on your homestead, if done properly. Because you'll find that you don't have to buy them as much feed as people are sold on, and that people are told, oh, you have to buy this amount of feed, that amount of feed. You don't. But all of that being said, where growing your animals might not be as beneficial is the cost of infrastructure, because you need a place for them to roost at night. They need protection. They need they need food. They need different things. And if they get sick, they're going to need a little bit of help there too. So you really want to weigh that out and see what's best for you and your family. Number 9, I think it's one of the most essential things for your mental health, the mental health of your entire family. Get out, go do something fun that is free. When we're talking about the cost of everything going up, the cost of feed, the cost of animals, the cost of food, the cost of gas, all of these things are increasing. It's sometimes beneficial for you to get out a little bit more regular and go do something that is fun and free. Now, I started off by saying try not to drive as much as you possibly can, but I would make an allowance for this. And it doesn't mean that you have to drive far. It doesn't mean that you have to take up a full tank of gas to go somewhere, but try to find something that you can do locally where you live that gets your family off of your property, out of the surroundings that you're accustomed to, and go do something fun, whether that's hiking, whether that's going to visit friends of yours, or, going to a local farmer's market and just kind of walking around and seeing different things and different faces, different people. Do something that's fun, something that's free, that doesn't cost you money, and do that on the regular. Do that regularly because it helps you clear your mind. It helps you to feel satisfied. It helps you to feel like you've done something, rather than just sitting around thinking about, I need to do this, I need to do that. There's always going to be 1,001 things that we all need to do, but getting out and recreating and being balanced should be one of those to-do list things that we should make an effort to do regularly with our entire family. So those are some of my ideas as far as inflation proofing your homestead, especially at the beginner stages of homesteading. Next week, it's going to be part 2, and we're going to be talking about inflation proofing an existing homestead. And we're going to be sharing with you some of the things that we do on our homestead here, and what we've done before in the past to inflation proof an existing homestead. I hope that this podcast finds you and your family well. And until next time, be safe out there.